You were raised in the church. What was your childhood like?
My parents were converts to the church. We went to church every Sunday. We had family home evening every Monday. We did scripture study every night. I did early morning seminary. You might be able to say I graduated high school a year early so that I didn't have to do that 4th year of early morning seminary. I met my former husband at Institute, and we were married and moved up to Rexburg to attend BYU, Idaho.
How many children do you have?
I have 3 children, but there have also been 6 foster children.
You guys left Rexburg and moved to
Amarillo, Texas.
Texas, and you moved back in 2015.
Yes. We meet a guy, and he is chatty and friendly, and probably 3 weeks later, I got a phone call one day, and it was this person, and he had told me that, he just kept being prompted to call me. He had an accounting firm, so he invited me over for an interview, which ended up being really casual, and we talked through what my goals were and what I was looking for, and he had just moved his practice from another state. And so he was looking to kind of build things from the ground up.
Pretty normal encounter, just...
Yes.
Nothing abnormal or anything, just, hey, I might need some help in my office, are you interested?
Yes, well, but everything was toned with, like, God is telling me that this is what I should do, and he's been harassing me about it, or, he's been pestering me that I need to talk to you. I was kind of torn between, oh my gosh, here is this job opportunity in a field that I love and am passionate about. It's the only core subjects that I did extra homework for. But it took me a long time to learn to embrace being a stay-at-home mom and the importance of that for my family. And so I ended up starting to work for him in July of 2015.
And it's just you and him at the beginning, right?
That's correct.
But he's married with a family and you're working out of his home.
That's correct.
Okay, so when did you start to witness abnormal behaviors?
I don't remember the timeline exactly, but it was probably that first month where he shared with me some of his spiritual gifts.
He volunteered that.
He volunteered that information. And I think in part it was because he was counseling people who were struggling with that, who had spirits inside of them and needed to be cast out, whether it was to help with pornography or other addictions or other illnesses.
Okay, so he's telling you that he's counseling with these people and evil spirits, and you just think, oh, that's...
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yes, it is what it is. I'm not going to sit here and worry about it too much. And he had shared it in part because these people would sometimes come during the workday and his office would be closed, and so I would not be able to interrupt. His friends knew about his spiritual gift, and they would tell their friends. So it was a word of mouth. It was his spiritual gift, and so he honored God by utilizing his spiritual gift.
So it wasn't part of his church position or
No.
part of his professional position.
No.
This was people that heard he had this gift, so they were coming to him to be healed.
Yes.
Where did it go from there?
So there was a speaker coming to Rexburg at the end of July, and he was so excited. He had read all of her books, and I think he'd even met her before, but it was one of Chad Daybell's authors, and he offered to get me tickets. I think he was either saying the prayer or helping conduct it somehow, but he got tickets for my former husband and I and my brother and my mom to attend, and he was just so excited about it. And
Chad Daybell published this woman's books.
yes, Chad Daybell was the publisher of this woman's books, but I had realized really quickly he was also a big prepper. He was preparing for end days. He'd been reading the dreams and visions that had been compiled by different people, and that was something that my former husband and I had been, into.
And that's what this event talked about.
Yes, this event was very focused on that. The big thing that I took away from it was, from Yukon North was going to be a city of light and a city of refuge and a place for the saints and the faithful to gather and be protected from the calamities that come as things kind of fall apart.
Which, from what we understand, is a belief that Chad Daybell has, that Rexburg is kind of a chosen land.
Yes.
And that's why he brought his family up here in 2015, around this time.
Yes.
Do you know, was Chad there?
Oh, yeah. And I think I met him at my employer's house either a couple days before or a couple days after. And that was the first time that I'd met him, was during that time period.
Chad, though, was obviously well respected.
Oh, he was idolized. The thing that really surprised me at that gathering was seeing how I'd never seen so many people that believed in this idea of tent cities, because that's the easiest way to call it is.
What is that idea?
Okay.
Explain the tent city idea.
Okay, because if you say tent cities and somebody knows what you mean, it's like you instantly connect and, oh my gosh, cool, you're into this.
I don't know what you mean.
I know you don't.
So if you could explain what tent cities are.
Sure. So one of the common ideas with members of the church who are focused on kind of the end times and preparing for the coming of Christ and the tribulations is this idea that some random Sunday, the bishop's going to come into Priesthood Relief Society and ask anybody who has their food storage to come join in another meeting. And he's going to say, it's time, we've been called out to go wherever, and you need to bring your food storage to the church. They'll load it up on trucks, and then you leave. People have their large canvas tents. We cashed out retirement at one point to buy that and more.
Wait, hold on. You and your husband.
Yes.
So, no, you don't have to laugh.
No, I'm laughing because of the absurdity of it now. Yeah. But we had two 16 by 20, 20 by 24 canvas tents. And they were and we had the massive cots from Cabela's and below 30 sleeping bags and a stove and a year's supply of charcoal to cook 3 meals a day. In these kind of prepper tent city communities, we believed that there would be a time that we would be called out. And if we weren't, then there would be a time that these items would be needed. And so we had a year's supply of certified gluten-free food storage because I had celiac. We had stuff to keep us warm. We had cloth diapers and little sets of scriptures because you never know whose kids you're going to be helping take care of.
Any idea how much money you spent on all that?
At least $15,000 to $20,000.
Wow. The behavior with your boss continued to, looking back now, to not be normal.
Yes. So there would be times where we'd be encountering constant software issues, whether it's a web-based product or a computer-based product. And eventually he said, hey, if you're noticing this happening, let me know, because it's usually we're getting some kind of interference. He always had what he called a shield of protection around his house and eventually extended that to be around the houses of all of his employees.
Invisible protection, right?
Yes.
I mean, we're not talking about a fence here.
Nope. We're talking about a spiritual shield of protection.
And how did he get that?
He knelt and prayed and invoked his priesthood authority.
So he said that the business was protected.
Yes.
And if you had any computer problems, let him know.
Yes, so that he could reinforce those protections or cast something out that got through. So if the computers are acting up, you holler upstairs to where his office is and you say, hey, can you take care of things?
So he's casting spirits out of computers, putting shields around the home and around the business. And you think that this is normal? I mean, you didn't think anything abnormal about it.
Like, I knew it was different, but I'm not going to judge what works for somebody, or at that time I wasn't going to judge what works for somebody. And it was always interesting as new employees came on, because it'd be a couple weeks, and then he would say, okay, I'm going to tell her today.
Chad would occasionally come by?
So yes, Chad had come by at least twice. I met him at work. But there were other members of this community. It was a constant subject of conversation. We were always talking either about, what people were doing or what was happening in the work.
How long were you there? 4 years?
I was there for 3 years.
3 years. What caused you to finally leave?
So I was invited to let an employee go as what appeared to be a growing experience in 2017. And it went badly and was enormously triggering emotionally. And I had struggled with PTSD from abuse and neglect in my childhood and other traumatic events, and it really caused a recurrence of the anxiety and a lot of those struggles. And so my employer was kind enough to set me up with this counselor / energy worker that he'd been working with, and we did, and she did it for free for me since I worked for him. And we did twice weekly counseling sessions over the phone for about 6 months, from the fall of 2017 to early 2018. And during these, it was a form of modified hypnosis. And every now and then, she would be encountering interference. So she would ask my boss to sit in on the sessions and help cast out spirits. And sometimes it wasn't needed, but he sat in on many of those sessions. And so towards the end of this work with her, my constant prayer began to be, I want to be able to see things as they are and not the story I've always told myself. As I'd been studying healing from trauma and abuse and neglect, one of the common themes was just that we rationalize and we tell ourselves that, so-and-so is a good person. But the reality is, if this is happening, so-and-so is not a good person, or their behavior is not good. And so I spent 2 weeks with that as an active prayer and had a breakthrough about the trauma that I'd experienced in my life. And I knew that this was the priority, dealing with my family and my emotional well-being. And so at first I just realized I need to step away from the church. Every decision I'd made there over the course of my life had been out of fear of not being loved, fear of not being cared for. And I guess this is a good time to say, I know that there are people that the church is an absolutely wonderful part of their life, that it is a great piece of their fantastic personality and the service that they do. My children are still members of the church. My parents are still members of the church. So I share this very aware of the possibility that it can hurt others' feelings. But it was for me and my life.
So you not only have to, in a way, leave this group, but leave the church.
Yes.
But at the time, you're thinking it's all the same.
I'm thinking it's all the same, and I don't even see how work and the marriage are all connected with it. So at first, I was just going to go inactive for a little bit so that I could focus on this part and not try to piece together or untangle the confusion that had come up with my faith. Faith crisis is what we often call it. And but I quickly realized within a matter of weeks that I could not sit in my skin knowing that I was not living up to my covenants. The promises that we make in the temple, at baptism, the idea of being a bad Mormon was absolutely unacceptable. And so I ultimately decided and consulted with my husband at the time and with his dad and realized, this is the best thing. And so I resigned from the church in March of 2018. My family, my children, all remained members. I ended up having the opportunity to go down and work with somebody in Utah. And I spent 28 days as an outpatient there, and he specialized in trauma and PTSD.
So you're going through this therapy, you're realizing you've got to find out who you really are. And meanwhile, what's happening at work?
He was not in the office very much. He would be out in Wyoming filming things for something. And so I was running the business and taking on too much responsibility. And more importantly, I was taking on too much of the mental load. And I would go through cycles of frustration. And so I left my job, but I had helped, we were partners in the building entity. So we still had frequent interaction, or at least the ex-husband did. And it was very uncomfortable. I didn't trust. From the moment that I left in April and when I quit in May, I became scared of my former boss. And not necessarily because of anything he did, but I didn't trust myself around him because I knew I didn't have boundaries. I knew that I had deferred to his knowledge and expertise or spiritual standing for so long that I couldn't trust myself.
Spiritually, you were scared of him, or physically too?
Spiritually and mentally.
You didn't think he'd hurt you?
No, I was never worried about that.
But that he might mess with your
yes,
emotions.
That he was going to mess with my emotions.
Yeah.
I had learned the phrase gaslighting at that time and was realizing that that's what I'd been experiencing. After I left my job, it was as though my former husband, who knew all the details about the dysfunction in my work environment and in my work relationships, it was as though he had forgotten all of that and began twisting things around and using the stories that my former employer was saying. I just knew that staying in that marriage was not acceptable or reasonable or a good decision.
The story breaks. And I think you messaged me within a day or two, or an hour or two maybe.
I think I messaged you within an hour or so. I was laying in bed, and I saw the kids' pictures, and I scrolled up, and I saw Chad's name, and it was like I came unglued. I immediately texted my office manager at my job at that time and said, "Oh my goodness, is he a client?" Because I was trying to remember how I knew this guy's name. How did I know him? And she replied back pretty quickly, "No, he's not." And that's when, I put my hands down on the bed like this, and I realized what all of this was. I realized it was Chad, and it was from my first job. And I'd had a friend, a really good friend, who came over one night about 8 months ago, and we were just chatting. And for whatever reason, I started telling her how into the prepper stuff we were. And I started telling her about what I had experienced in my work environment. And she sat there dumbfounded and told me that I had been in a cult and that none of this stuff was okay. And I didn't believe her.
And this is a Latter-day Saint?
This is an active Latter-day Saint.
And she told you you've been in a cult?
She told me I was in a cult. And she told me that this was abuse and that it wasn't okay. And I remember sitting there and like, okay, I hear the words you're saying. I'm not going to internalize them because I don't know what to do with them. And that just seems crazy. I was just super faithful. So when I saw that day, I freaked because it meant that she was right.
Why did you decide to talk publicly about this?
I feel an enormous amount of shame for staying in a dysfunctional environment with gaslighting and manipulation for so long. I feel enormous shame for staying in an unhealthy marriage. I feel shame for believing the things that I believed. If there's another person in my shoes who's dealing with this and it's under the guise of, spiritual guidance or trying to help keep you on the path to God or keeping you, in a place where you can receive the blessings that God has for you, I want that person to be able to see that they might need to look at it from a different angle. I've had constant stomach troubles throughout my life, and I had celiac for 7 years at that point, and my intestines were just really struggling. And one day, my employer and I were talking, and I was probably crying because I was hurting so bad. And he said, "Don't you have the faith to be healed?" But that day in his office, I was hurting so much, and I was so desperate to not be in pain that there was a shift in my mind, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna see if I can get to a place where I feel like I could be healed. And I talked about it with my former husband. I talked about it with my boss. And a week or two later, on Mother's Day, 2016, they gave me a blessing and healed my celiac and healed my blood sugar issues. And they healed hormonal imbalances and thyroid issues to where I stopped taking all my thyroid medicine and my supplements. And I slowly got to where I wasn't so scared. And I eventually tried eating bread. And I didn't have a reaction. And so I kept...
So they truly healed you?
That's what I thought. I genuinely believe they did. I knew that it would take months before it would show in my system because I had been gluten-free so strict and so long that I tested negative for it at that point.
But you started to feel better.
Yeah, I was feeling better. I was eating. It was lovely to not obsess about food and worry about that. And I knew at some point I'll go to the doctor and just get tested to make sure that I'm not doing any damage to my body. But 2 years later, I end up in the GI doctor's office, and I'm telling him what I'm feeling at that point. My stomach's upset more often. I'm having trouble eating certain foods. And he says, "Oh, that sounds a lot like celiac." And I had told him about the blessing, understanding he'd be skeptical. I was ex-Mormon at that time. And he said, "Let's do a biopsy and confirm." And sure enough, it comes back that I had active celiac. And I had been, after that, as I adapted to, well, now I have to be gluten-free again, I had been told by a handful of people that, well, maybe it was my lack of faith that undid the healing. And so the other reason I speak to you is because I was so wrapped up in all of this that as an intelligent woman who'd had a disease for 7 years and had done all the research, I believed I'd been healed enough to start eating bread again. And after 2 years had done an enormous amount of damage to my intestines.
There will be people that say you're just disgruntled at your old boss, or you're disgruntled toward the church, or, well, you got caught up in that crazy stuff, you should have thought otherwise. What would you say to those people watching?
It took me 2 years to talk about this to somebody outside of my former husband. So to the people who want to say that I'm doing this because I'm disgruntled or angry, they're going to believe what they want to believe. I would rather have sat in my house tonight watching Netflix. And to those who think I'm here to rail on the doctrine or rail on the church, like, I'm now starting to see that I'm Mormoned wrong. My brother and I joke about that. He has also left the church in the last year. But we joke about how our sisters seem to be able to Mormon right. There's some flexibility. They can be nuanced. They make it work for them. But we were so black and white and rigid in our thinking, and I was so in this group of righteous obsession, and that I couldn't do it right. And so even now, I don't know that I'd ever go back, but do you know, in a year and a half, 2 years, when my daughter's going to be 8, I'll be there with my baptism dress for her to wear. And I will do her hair, and I will help her get dressed, and I will sit there with a big smile on my face, and I will support her on that day. When my boys decide to get married and sealed in the temple, I will sit outside of that temple and be an awesome, smiling mom, because that's what I can do for my children. I can support them in their